Hey there, welcome to Help Solve the Case. I'm Christine Burke, and today we are going to continue our review of our DNA and forensic science analysis about how the DNA gets to where we find it in our court cases. We've talked about a lot. This is the third video. There should be two prior videos. If you want to start at the beginning so that you can catch up, please feel free to do that. And I love all of your questions. I try to learn as much as I can and apply this throughout the cases that we are covering here on the channel. And I thank you for being here. I love the kind words and I really appreciate your support as this helps me donate my time to help identify the over 15,500 unidentified human remains cases across the United States and donate the forensic genetic genealogy to work to identify suspects so that we can help, sometimes victims too, so that we can help our folks out and get closure in these cases. And I would invite you to consider joining the community at helpsolvethecase.com. It all helps me to continue this work and that work that I do. All right, so let's get back to it. And I will just preference this that because of YouTube, that's why I have my other community so that I can speak freely. But sometimes we want to be a little cautious about what we talk about in these videos. You may hear me referring to some picnic condiments, and that just is what it is. If I sound like I'm talking weird, I probably am. Going back to 2.3, the manner of contact and handling. And Van Oorschot and Jones observed that substantial transfer of DNA material occurs during initial contact. That's the initial contact of two items. Findings of others concur with these observations. One may predict that there will be some accumulation of DNA on an object due to an increased duration or frequency of contact. However, little is known with respect to DNA quantity accumulation profiles for objects of different types and substrates, that's the material, that may be dependent on duration and or frequency of use. And they say it requires further research. And what we're looking at here is because if we go back to some of our cases, we're talking about Tyler Robinson, Charlie Kirk, we're talking about Brian Koberger, we're talking about Matthew Nilo, now we're talking about Murdaugh. And how did the DNA get there? And I started this. If you don't know me, I'm a law enforcement expert. I comment and critique, depending on which side, both prosecution and defense cases, specifically around DNA and what the police did and all that stuff. And I started reading this material in depth. I'm not a biologist, never claimed to be, but I started reading this material because I have a particular case that the client is 1000% positive that they were not there and they didn't do it. But the state is saying the DNA is them and it's there. And my investigative mind and my logical mind said, well, we have to account for that. How can that happen? And I started researching these articles and I started going through this and I said, wow, this is really interesting because we have seen, and I've talked about in other videos, how the court systems are more and more moving from there's DNA there, dude had to do it, to activity level has nothing to do with the DNA being present. And we heard that in the Tyler Robinson case. I believe it was the second witness, the ATF witness in the preliminary hearing. The defense attorney was doing some good grilling. Now, we try to not be on one side or the other, but we have to give props where props are due. And the defense attorney was going to town on this DNA witness. And so we had this DNA present, multiple people involved, shared residence, shared items. How do you even begin to account for that. And these have been so interesting to me to see that just because someone's major or minor, it doesn't mean that they were more or less likely to be the contributor. Some people, check out the other video, super shedders, not, what do they say, good shedders, bad shedders? I like super shedders, not super shedders. What does that mean? We talked about cloth and porous surfaces versus smooth surfaces. And now we're talking about here, what they say is that one may, means might, predict that there will be accumulation of DNA on an object due to a longer time, increased duration. Here's my gum. Can't go without the props. Due to a longer time holding it, or how many times you come in contact with it. But they say little is known with respect to the DNA quantity accumulation profiles for objects of different types and substrates. That means material that may be dependent on duration and or frequency of use. And why is this important? Because how many times could somebody have come in contact with, say, a knife sheath or a weapon or a screwdriver or cleaning or housework or whatever stuff could get under your fingernails, trying to think about all the cases where DNA could be picked up on a glove. How many places would your glove in the winter come in contact with the exterior of your glove to pick up DNA? All things we need to think about. And they continue here to say how contact is made with an object will impact the level of transfer. As indicated in section 2.1, Gray et al. Demonstrated that in most situations, when two objects come in contact with each other, more DNA tends to be transferred when pressure with friction is applied compared to passive contact or pressure contact without friction. I'm going to be gross here. Think about the cheese grater, especially on my hand, right? Friction. Cheese grater. I know it's gross, but gives you the visual. And those of you that go to the spa and get the pedicure on your heels, think about that DNA coming off. You know what I'm talking about, right? Just think about the nail salon and how many people's DNA, that's so gross, are in those pedicure tubs. That would be a gold mine, all right? Conspiracy theorists go to the nail salon and follow somebody around after a pedicure if you want to make sure to look for the cheese grater and get your DNA. Those of you who know exactly what I'm talking about. Tobias et al. Confirmed that when surfaces were contacted by fingertips, increasing the pressure significantly increased the amount of DNA deposited, which resulted in the detection of more alleles from both the donor and the unknown sources. Let's talk about how this will be important. Strangulation, gripping a weapon, or a tool, an implement, a screwdriver, right? How hard, here's my screwdriver, I got some of my props. How hard do you have to crank that puppy down sometimes? Pressure. A weapon. How hard are you hanging on to that bloody axe so it doesn't fly out of your hand? Not being gross, we're just trying to give analogies. Different parts of a hand will contact different items in different ways. In some circumstances, it may be relevant to have an awareness of the impact of these differences on the amount of DNA deposited and the profiles generated. This is another good point I gotta talk about. In some cases, I want to say many, but I won't. In some cases, it has come to my attention, and we've read some articles about it. There's some videos on this channel We've talked about who makes the decision about what DNA is tested, where they swab that item. And sometimes it is left up to the analyst who sits at the bench in the lab, who is not the crime scene person, and who is certainly not the detective at the scene that is used to developing motive, intent, investigations, confessions, modus operandi. Think about that. I feel we always have a problem with that, whether it's exculpatory evidence or inculpatory evidence, because they could just be taking a swab. Hopefully, they could just be taking the swab right here, well, God forbid, right here, which is not where you're getting the gum from. I'm not touching down here. Now, if they say, which I think we read in the prior videos, they said the palm was not as good as the fingertips, would it be better to swab here where my palm is? Or would it be better to swab where there's going to be friction? Hopefully you can see this. I'm popping up the snap. Where there's friction there. Friction, we just talked about friction. We talked about fingerprints and pressure, because you do have to apply pressure. Where would be the best place to swab? Now, me personally, I want you to swab that whole puppy with separate swabs. I don't want you to cut and mix your swabs, but I want you to swab the whole puppy here, because I want to make sure that you got every speck of DNA that can either identify the suspect or rule out the suspect. None of this just, I got it right there. None of that. That's me. That's just me. I understand labs run as a business. Time is scarce. People aren't trained as well. Sometimes contracts always say you only get one Q-tip and that's all you get. I want this. You better be with separate Q-tips. Separate Q-tips. Let me correct that. What they're saying here is it may be relevant. I'm not saying they're saying it. It may be relevant to have an awareness, ding, 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 of the impact of these differences on the amount of DNA deposited in the profiles generated. OWE, hopefully I'm saying that right, et al. Observed that less DNA was deposited by or collected directly from the entire palm area than by the combined total of the distal phalanges, your fingies, of the middle and ring finger, despite the differences in the surface area. So they're saying that you get more DNA from just right here and right here than all this whole area here. It's kind of like DNA living in the country and DNA living in the city. More per capita out here in the city, in the high rises, versus living in the country. If we're holding this or touching this with the palm, you want the finger parts. You want the finger parts. Namely, I don't know why they picked these two fingers, but maybe they'll tell us. The results of McCall et al. Concur with these observations. They observed that different parts of a hand appear to have proportionally more DNA, more non-self DNA, meaning DNA you're carrying from other people, and may be more likely to pick up and transfer non-self DNA than others, especially fingertips relative to other hand parts. And this could get really gross, thinking about people's DNA and all kinds of other nasty stuff on your hands. Always wash your hands, but we're going to keep going. It could be kind of gross. All right. Different objects are handled differently depending on their shape, size, and use. Furthermore, Identical objects may be used differently by different people. That's true. Have you heard about how many people hold the pencil? And hopefully you can see me this way, or they hold it this way, right? People just even hold a pencil differently. Therefore, different parts of an object may possess different levels of DNA, possibly from different sources. For example, handles of most tools and weapons are used relatively similarly by different users because it's made that way. But objects such as a long pipe or stick or a stretch of rope or tape can be handled in different locations depending on use. Yes. Don't be taking, and I'm saying this for a reason, don't be taking a 56-inch shoelace in only wiping one part of the little plastic part at one end when you have a whole 56-inch shoelace that was used to bind somebody, and you're going to wrap it and you're going to pull it and you're going to do stuff. Don't be just testing that little part down there. Just saying. All right. The handle of a knife is handled by the stabber, and if done so by bare hands, let's pretend this is and if done so by bare hands, tends to contain DNA of the offender. This is the handle. We're going to pretend. Whereas the blade inserted into a victim will typically contain DNA from the victim. That kind of makes sense, right? Because it's going to go like this. A chair seat and armrest are contacted as a matter of course when using a chair to sit on, but may be grabbed by its back legs, an area normally very rarely touched by hands or exposed to human legs when the chair is used as a weapon of opportunity. Well, let me tell you, I got some dust. I got some dust on mine. I live in Arizona. I've got dirt and dust. But my chair legs, they're thinking about probably the four-legged, like a wooden chair. And this is a good visual, right? The wooden chair where the front legs, as you're sitting on it, your feet are gonna rub against it. They're probably talking about the back legs, but I was thinking of my desk chair, and my desk chair rolls around and the legs are like this in a kind of star shape, and they roll around as I roll around. My foot DNA is, and I'm short, so sometimes I prop my feet up on those legs. This is why it helps to have a mindset of how the crimes occur and what the activity was going on in the residence or at the crime scene, rather than in the lab just having a piece of something that you don't know what the mechanism of use was. A door may be pushed at different locations depending on the height of the person pushing the door. And now I have this visual coming out of the bathroom after washing your hands. You don't want to touch that thing at all, right? You're probably using your foot. Who is pushing where? If they have a push bar, you're going to be pushing on the push bar. All kinds of different places. If you have a sliding door, where are you going to do that? An adjustable lamp or instrument with handles on the right and left side may be grabbed solely from one side depending on the handedness of the user. The switch or plug of a standing lamp, and I'm looking at one right now, may be targeted for the normal user. The switch or plug of a standing lamp may be targeted for the normal user. I touch that button every day. But other areas not frequently touched, like the lamp's stem, may be targeted for DNA from the intruder who is suspected of having grabbed it there to use as a weapon of opportunity, or the lamp space targeted for DNA from the victim whose injuries are suspected to have been caused by contact with it during an assault. All good visuals. Inner collar and wrist areas of an upper garment are targeted preferentially to detect DNA from a potential wearer, whereas an external area of the upper arm or shoulder may be targeted to detect DNA from the person who grabbed them during an alleged assault. All good visuals. Furthermore, the level of interaction from a single static contact of a specific sub-area of an object to multiple frequent and varied manners and locations of contact, a handled object with another object will also vary widely. A study by Pfeiffer and Wiegand demonstrated the impact of different intensities of handling a tool, intense mock break-in to a premises versus normal use of a tool according to its design purpose on the types of profiles subsequently collected. In awareness of the common means of use, handling of items of relevance in combination with the knowledge of A, the specific histories of the item of interest, B, the contacts with the item relevant to the alleged criminal activity, and C, the differences in transfer rates by different parts of a hand or other body part may become useful when a choice needs to be made regarding which area of an object or print to prioritize when sampling. Yes. All right. Prevalence of DNA, background DNA, general considerations. It is reasonable to assume that most surfaces and items that smelled really good when I opened it that time. I got to smell the peppermint. It's reasonable to assume that most surfaces and items, unless new or cleaned, will have some DNA on them that has been acquired from previous use. This DNA is often termed, quote, background DNA. I think we're going to get gross here, folks. This is especially so for personal items and shared items used regularly. Surfaces that are not regularly contacted may have less DNA on them. If items possessing background DNA are then used by others, i.e., the offender, during the course of an alleged criminal activity, mixtures from the usual user, they always get me with the alliteration, don't they? Mixtures from the usual user and offender can be expected. For example, a study of background levels of DNA on common burglary entry points from 20 different premises, windows and doors, found 26% produced a DNA profile. Furthermore, the authors observed the level of DNA on common entry points to be relatively low and suggested that as windows are a common entry point for burglars but have a low baseline level of DNA compared to other surfaces, these may therefore be a good target area for evidence recovery if a window was used to gain entry. I thought they just said that it was a low level. I don't know what the ratio is, but 26 seems pretty low to me. I was gonna make a joke that the burglars should use the windows because they were only getting 26%. And is that 26% of suspect profiles, or is that 26% of everybody profiles? Oh, maybe they're talking about a low baseline level of DNA, meaning other people's DNA. I don't know. What are you thinking? How did you read that? Background DNA may be derived from one person, mainly personal objects and environments, or from several individuals, mainly shared objects, environments, but also personal objects. When the sample of the interest contains a substantial quantity of, here we go, mayonnaise, ketchup, or water that has been deposited on an item with a background of touch or minute levels of other sources of DNA, then an appropriately collected sample of interest, the mayonnaise, blood, or water, may provide a single source profile as the quantity of DNA from this source can overwhelm that of the background. What they're saying here is that let's just say we have a coffee table and there's background DNA on the coffee table from the residents that live there because I put my feet on my coffee table. I hope you do too. There's my feet, my visitors' feet, Everybody's feet is on the coffee table. Hands are on the coffee table. Maybe sometimes we eat on the coffee table. Now I'm having this visual. I bring the mail in and I put it on the coffee table. So God knows whose DNA is on the top of the coffee table. But let's say here that the burglar leaves some ketchup on the coffee table. The burglar drips ketchup on the coffee table. They're saying here that when the sample of interest, which would be our burglar's ketchup, contains a substantial quantity, if it gets deposited on the item, which would be our coffee table, an appropriately collected sample, appropriately collected, may provide a single source profile. As the quantity of the ketchup, the DNA in the ketchup, can overwhelm that of the background. Think about painting over or let's talk about varnishing an unfinished wood coffee table, right? That varnish is just going to cover it. However, many such samples still provide mixed profiles. If the stain of mayonnaise, ketchup, or water is itself at minute levels, meaning little levels, one is more likely to generate a mixture profile that is inclusive of DNA from the mayonnaise, ketchup, and water, as well as one or more individuals from the background DNA. Let's just talk about weapons, for example, rifles. If it's like the coffee table and it's used frequently out at the range amongst family members or friends, and they're doing, what do you call that thing? They released it. What do you call that thing? Oh my goodness. They fly it up in the air and you shoot skeet. It's not skeet. Is that skeet? They release it, it flies up, you shoot it, and then everybody's trying to hit it, and then you pass the gun to the next person and all that. It's like the coffee table. Everybody's DNA is on there. Or let's just say it's a rifle or something that is in your house somewhere. Maybe it's in the back of the truck, and every time you drive the truck, and then your spouse drives the truck, it's in the way, and you got to move it away, or it's in the garage and you move it around or whatever. That rifle has all that background DNA on it. And then it gets other people's DNA. And let's say it comes back with a 4 or 5 person profile. Whose do you take? Who do you pick as the primary person? How do you know if one might have covered up or mixed with the other? That's what it's talking about here. That minute one is more likely, and it's talking about the picnic, the mayonnaise, ketchup, or water, but it's the same type of thing, that a mixture can be mixed up with the background DNA and the new DNA. So you can't tell whose is what. It says this is illustrated in a study by Peel and Gill, who found that when diluted ketchup and water samples were deposited on a glass slide that had been handled before or after the deposit, DNA was recovered from both the fluid and the handler, the respective ratios of which were dependent on the volume and concentration of the fluid and the shutter status of the handler. If both the background DNA and the deposit of interest are touch sources, then a mixed profile inclusive of owner and the second user is likely. You're going to get a mixture of the people in the background and the bad guy or girl. However, the proportional contributions will be dependent on the levels of background DNA due to history of use, how the second user interacted with the surface, the duration of this interaction, and the sheddar status of both users. Very important. Think about our cases. When dealing with touch DNA as a background or deposit of interest, the presence of non-self DNA on the hand of the individuals involved, oh my goodness, here, may contribute to a more complex mixed DNA profile. Furthermore, I'm going to go back to it. Furthermore, from a casework perspective, it may be relevant to assess whether the same unknown contributor has contributed to multiple traces. Oh my God, this is going to blow your mind. This is often difficult due to limitations in mixture interpretation. Developments in probabilistic models, including mixture deconvolution, may assist in identifying the same unknown in multiple traces. All right, let me see if I can interpret this right. When they're talking about non-self DNA, they're talking about, let's just talk about coming back from the grocery store. I just came back from the grocery store and I didn't wash my hands. Think about all those people's DNA that's on my hands. Now, if I am the suspect and I pick up my rifle, let's say, my non-self DNA may not even get on the rifle, because what's getting on the rifle is all that DNA from the people at the grocery store. Yeah? You getting, is that what you're reading? That's what I'm getting there. It says, when dealing with touch DNA as a background or a deposit of interest, the presence of non-self DNA on the hand of the individuals involved may contribute to a more complex mixed DNA profile. Think about that. You're going to get everybody at the grocery store on that rifle or on that screwdriver or on that whatever stick. Possibly more so than the suspect themselves. And not only are you going to have all the people from the grocery store, you're going to have the background DNA that was already on the rifle. And you're going to have a mixture. And where have we seen that with mixtures? I think that's what they're saying here. Let's move forward. How do we distinguish background from deposit? Let's talk about our friend here. Deciphering what was already on the object and what was added during the action of interest can become a contentious issue. Therefore, awareness of general levels of background DNA quantity, origin, and quality may be useful. Further complicating factors are a person's sheddar status, and I asked in the sheddar video, should we be testing people for sheddar status or sheddar propensity? It seems logical to me. There are people they don't do good fingerprints. They just don't biologically. All right. This type of data is, however, very sparse and needs addressing. The sheddar status, I think. Now, this article, if you remember, is 2019, I believe. So we may have more recent data on that. I'm going to search for it because, as I said, I'm on a mission about this and I want to understand, because I have a guy that swears upside down and sideways and backwards that there's no way, and they want to know how it got there, especially when we have tiny, and those of you know what case I'm talking about, tiny pieces of DNA. Researchers are investigating means of distinguishing recent deposits from old deposits, which they're calling background, and or time since deposition. Wouldn't that be nice to know? These include exploiting time-dependent changes relating to nucleic acid degradation, mRNA, proteins, biomarkers, and cell morphology. I like that. Whilst not a prescribed policy in most jurisdictions, and often not possible, in some situations, it may be useful to collect a sample from an area immediately adjacent to the area targeted for an evidentiary sample, thus revealing a profile that is possibly very similar to the background component of the target evidentiary sample. Let's talk about our coffee table. And I was looking for something I could use like a coffee table. Let's say this is our coffee table. It's a little one. And the ketchup, so we have all this background DNA from everybody in the residents and their friends' feet and the cleaning people's feet and hands and whatever, and the people in the store, who knows where they bought the coffee table, whatever. And let's say the ketchup is right here. Only the ketchup is right here. They're going to hopefully use one or two different Q-tips and take part of the ketchup. Now, as we just heard, when they take the ketchup, hopefully they're going to get a single source profile, but they might get a mixture, which is going to be this background DNA of the regular folks and the suspect. What they're saying here is it may be useful to collect a sample from an area immediately adjacent to the area targeted for an evidentiary sample. Let's say this silver part is the ketchup part, and this part of the table is the normal part, the untouched part where the suspect didn't ketchup. They would take a Q-tip here in different areas here, and then they would take a separate Q-tip over here to see what is the normal. It's like the control in the experiment. What is normally present in the control versus the, whatever that's called, the area of interest. Experiment control. Hopefully that looks good. The similarity, however, may have been comprised depending on the nature of the action depositing the biological substance of interest in the target area, as some of the background may have been lost from the primary surface to the contacting secondary surface, bidirectional transfer. Vandenberg et al. Present data from a small example study considering the potential value of collecting post-activity background samples as a control. Did I not just say I just said that? To assist activity level reporting. There was a time when such background samples, oh my God, known as substrate controls, were taken alongside areas of body fluid staining, for example, in the UK and possibly other jurisdictions. Go figure. There was a better way to do it that we used to do it, and we're not doing that now. However, these were for the purpose of checking for any potential interference from the substrate when using ketchup grouping tests on a specific area of body fluid staining. When DNA profiling superseded blood grouping, that's the ABO, the value of such substrate controls for the purpose of detecting interference was brought into question, and ultimately, the taking of substrate controls ceased. Interestingly, although critical of the use of substrate controls for their original purpose, Gill also commented that the taking of such substrate controls could help with certain types of DNA interpretation. That's like known versus unknown. Within the broader context, when the prevalence of a POI, that's a person of interest, within a crime scene is relevant, One may benefit from collecting a range of samples depending on the case, including one, an item for controls. For instance, immediately adjacent to the target area. Two, similar items like knives from a kitchen. Three, items in the immediate vicinity of the item of evidence, like the pillow from under which the gun was found. That's a good point. What rubbed on it? And, or, four, from the wider crime scene. Such samples would provide case-specific probabilities for prevalence background, which would be better than generalized probabilities based on experimental studies. From a cost-benefit perspective, those Q-tips are expensive. Such samples could be collected, but only analyzed if they become relevant within the context of the case. The availability of reference samples of known regular users, wearers of an object, may also assist the interpretation of the profile, irrespective of them being the victim, POI, or an incidental, non-associated individual. Further research is required to understand the influence of any background DNA on the interpretation of mixed profiles. Heck yes! If you're going here, let me get my Q-tip. If you're going there, I got to get a different Q-tip because we're not going to contaminate it. And then we get one here. How long does that take? It doesn't take very long. I think that's a freaking fabulous idea. And we were doing it. And why are we not doing it? How much is a Q-tip? How much is a Q-tip? Well, how much is a Q-tip to take it? And of course, I'm talking about a swab. I like referring to them as Q-tips. How much does a Q-tip cost? Is it like that $10,000? What was that? A screw or a bolt, a nut, whatever that thing is that we had in the government? Was it 10,000 or whatever? How much is a Q-tip? You know what? I'm gonna have to answer that. Hold please. Hold please. I gotta find my. You're gonna be shocked. You're gonna be shocked. I put here, how much is a lab forensic swab used to collect DNA material? 40 cents to $2, while a fully packed single-use forensic DNA collection kit, $3 to $15. Bulk sterile swabs, a pack of 100 is 42, so 42 cents per swab. We don't recommend any of these people. We're not advertising. We're just talking about here. How much are they? What I'm saying here, if it's 40 cents per swab, we can take it from, why don't we just take it from the adjacent area and keep it in case we need it? We don't have to test it necessarily, but we have it if we get, I'm having this, if we get, well, and you're not supposed to be, according to what I hear, going through a mixture with 4 or 5 people. Let's just say we got 3 people over here from the ketchup. We have a mixture of 3 people from the ketchup. This is our coffee table. And then we decide to take, we'll call it our control sample. And we don't know who is what over here in the suspect sample. And we come over here and we take a control sample and we can say, oh my gosh, the same 2 people are over here as over here, even though we don't know who they are, right? Because they're not in CODIS or whatever, but the same 2 are over here and there's one different over here. Then even if we don't know who they are, that would give us a lead and that the third person over here is who we're looking at. I think that's a fabulous idea. And then if we took other areas or other different things and we keep getting the same 2 profiles over here, even though we don't necessarily know who they are, unless this ketchup all got mixed in, right? We would need to somehow isolate the ketchup, but that may be a helpful process of elimination, especially when we don't have results in CODIS. And then if we did forensic genetic genealogy, like if we had to, we would know who those people are. We would know who the people are to eliminate. That's my grandma. That's my grandma. Yeah, every time she comes over, she puts her feet on the table. It's my grandma. Just saying, this is why thinking through the possibilities on this, I think is amazing. It's so fascinating. It's amazing. Hopefully you do too. Again, just things to think about when we're going through these cases. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel, and I will see you on the next one.